All right. We're taking all the best old school wisdom and blending it with the top new school methods to bring you the optimal coaching strategies. This is the 80-20 Baseball Podcast with Coach Bo.
Welcome, youth baseball community. Coach Bo here, pumped up to bring you a great interview today. This is part one of the interview I did with Coach Adam SARANCIK, who just released his fourth book on coaching. Today's part one, and it's about 45 minutes of some really good information that's very helpful that we can use to go out there and be better coaches. So we're going to dive right into that. Some of the topics we talk about here are coaching up the process, comparing process versus results. We have a nice little back and forth on that. We talk about the warm-up routine, pre-practice routines, throwing progressions. I think it turned out to be a really good conversation filled with a lot of useful stuff for us to go use. Just a quick reminder before we jump in to head over to 8020baseball.com and get your free drill design guide. It lays out the exact parts of what makes great drills, optimal drills. You can get that for free right there on the homepage. Feel free to send me your questions, coachbo at 8020baseball.com. And leave a quick review to help support this podcast. That's always much appreciated. And thanks to all of you that have done that. All right, let's talk to Coach SARANCIK. He just came out with his fourth book titled Teacher, Role Model, Mentor. Lessons learned from a lifetime in coaching. His other books include Coaching Champions for Life, takeaway quotes from Coaching Champions for Life, and A Ground Ball to Shortstop. How and why coaches see their game differently than anyone else. Adam's the owner of Elevate Sports Academy, which mentors student athletes in physical conditioning, nutrition, college and career counseling, and sports skills. He's a frequent contributor to several leading coaching resource publications, including American Baseball Coaches Association, publication Inside Pitch, Collegiate Baseball News, Coaches Insider, Sports Engine, and Coach Deck. All right, with that said, let's dive into part one of our interview. All right, I am here with Coach Adam SARANCIK. How you doing, Coach?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you back on. Yeah, I'll tell you what, I always look forward to having you on the podcast because you have so much to share and you articulate things so well. So thank you for coming back on.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And let me thank again all the coaches and administrators and sports officials and everyone that has anything to do with youth sports and making this happen for the young people. We appreciate you and we thank you for your time and your efforts. I always want to start with that.
100%. It is something to be proud of and something to hang your hat on. Speaking of coaching and speaking of trying to go out there, not just to volunteer time, but to be good at what we're doing as coaches, we're on today to talk about practice planning, practice and coaching methodology. And you wrote an article titled The 5 Tips for 5 Phases of Practice to Dramatically Improve the Coaching Methodology of Youth Coaches. I'll start off by saying as youth coaches, we do think a lot about game time decisions and we think about going out to the game and playing well and the scoreboard and all those things and how the players look during the games. But at the end of the day, what drives the success in a game is almost all related to the training environment, the practice environment, and things that happen well before that game. So I want to say that. So the importance of practice, of course, is through the roof. And I think as coaches, that's really where we shine. That's really our time to build up our players and let them go during the games and do their thing. So speaking of practice, the 5 phases of practice, what do you got for us, Adam, on this?
I think we have to go back first, Coach, to why we're coaching. We have to remember that we'd love to win games. We'd love to win championships. That's certainly a lot of fun. But these players are going to get so much more from us or can get so much more from us if we're looking at them in a little broader, more holistic way as persons first, athletes next, and then players after that. 3-part development project. If you go about your practice plans and the way you evaluate your practice plans in that way, do we do things actively, proactively to develop them as people? Do we do things proactively to develop them as athletes so that they're not just good at baseball, they can be good at other sports too? We're going to ask them to play other sports and to enjoy other sports. Well, let's take 20 minutes of every practice and develop that athleticism. So we have to remember that. And then as players, there's a thorough, more detailed, organized way of going about developing them as players too. I'd like to take 5 areas of practice. These aren't the only 5, but there's 5 areas that I've seen most often. Coaches tend to just replicate what other coaches have seen, they see other coaches do, and they just do it over and over without thinking, why am I doing this? Okay, how can maybe I do it better? So asking that why question over and over and over again. So let's just talk about free practice, or before we ever get to practice and we've got our team and we're thinking about the season and now we're thinking about a practice. What should be going through my mind? What are 5 things that should go through my mind when I'm developing this practice plan? So the first thing is you got to do your homework. Number 1, do your homework. And what I mean by that is, how are you going to develop them as people, as athletes, and as players? You've got to set some goals for the season, for the week, for the day, all right? And you work backward in that way. What are my goals to develop them as people, athletes, and players, and how am I going to achieve that? And then secondly, I've got to get information from reputable sources. There's a lot of misinformation out there on baseball in particular about how to throw, field, and hit a baseball. I've got to make sure that I'm teaching these guys something that's not only correct, but consistent. One of the problems in youth baseball is that they hear something different on mechanics, fundamentals of mechanics every year on how to throw, field, and hit a baseball. And they're confused, all right? Let's get on the same page, make sure we're teaching the right stuff, make sure the league and the coaches in the league are teaching things consistently, and make sure the high school coaches are coming down and monitoring what's being taught so that when the players get to high school, they're not having to be retaught, just refined, okay? So do your homework. Have goals for these guys as people, athletes, and players. Go back to our other podcasts on how to do that. And make sure that the information you have is good information and is going to be consistent team to team, year to year. Second tip in pre-practice, master teaching what you know before expanding what you know, and be sure that you're teaching it using all of the learning modalities, auditory, visual, and kinesthetic, particularly visual and kinesthetic, because players today are not primary auditory learners or visual and kinesthetic learners. Master teaching what you know before expanding what you know. I think a lot of youth coaches get caught up in the drill of the week mentality. We need to find something different to work on hitting this week. They have to remember that hitting a ball off a tee or off a pitcher is step 5 in the teaching process, not step 1, okay? Fielding a ball at shortstop or catching a fly ball in the outfield, that's step 5 in the process, not step 1. I'll go over that a little bit later when we get to position fundamentals. But we have to remember that there's a process here, and we have to be good at teaching that process. And if we don't know it, leagues should be teaching us how to teach. We know how the game should be played. A lot of youth coaches, dads, moms, whomever, they were really good players. They were college players. They were pro players. They know how to stand in the third base coach's box and coach the game. The first and third defense should look like, a bunt defense should look like. But teaching the game, especially at a young age to youth players who may not be good yet, they're not developed yet, that's a whole different ballgame. Whole different ballgame. Like I say, you've got learning modalities, different personalities, and over and above that, they just may have expertise in areas that they played as college or pro players, pitchers, catchers, whatever. They may not be that good at teaching something else. They may know a heck of a lot about pitching, not that much about catching. They may know a heck of a lot about infield play, not that much about pitching. So maybe the league ought to consider having these players go to clinics every week run by coaches who actually know a lot of good information and good techniques, how to teach that position. So my point there is, you know, only after you've mastered teaching what you know. Number 3, prepare physically and mentally to prepare to teach or mentor the person, train the athlete, and develop the player. What I mean by that is coaching is a verb, okay? It's an action word. You should be a teacher. Well, to do that, you got to spend some time getting ready yourself, all right? How good are you at throwing BP, hitting all the different types of baseballs, ground balls, fly balls, or whatever? You have to get yourself ready to teach these kids how to be athletes. You can't just tell them how to do an athleticism, dynamic movement, and stretching routine. You got to be able to do it yourself and do it correctly and know how to assess it, program it, teach it, progress it, and compete it. All right. So you got to be able to do this. So you got to spend some time getting yourself ready to do it. And if you can't, you got to find somebody who can. The word coach is a verb. It's an action word. You've got to be able to demonstrate to these kids what should be done, not just tell them what to do, okay? Number 4, I do believe there's a lot of value in having a written practice plan that's posted so the players have an idea of, you know what, this is our system. This is what we do. All right. We're going to adjust for weather and field conditions and things like that. But this is the way we do it. There's an expectation of time that it's going to get done in a timely manner. We're going to move through it. It has a progression that makes sense. All right. There's a building block, scaffolding progression that makes sense. And it leads to an end of the practice game simulation or scrimmage where the coaches do nothing but watch the players compete and see if they've learned what the coaches thought they should have learned. Okay. But the players read it. They read in that practice plan that there's going to be quotations or acronyms that they're going to be expected to discuss about life lessons or baseball IQ, so that this is more than just about learning baseball fundamentals and mechanics. We've got life lessons here. We've got things that we're interested in to develop them more than just as a player. And then 5, and this is a big one for me, these coaches out there are working so hard to do so many things, and they don't have enough help a lot of times. Before practice, they're setting up mounds, they are preparing the field, setting up bases, setting up stations. Players are arriving and throwing the baseball, swinging the bat, hitting the ball, doing all these things. Coaches aren't around. And then practice starts, they have a cheer, and the coaches go away and either talk to each other or continue to prepare the field. And they tell the players to go and do your dynamic movement. Show them once at the beginning of the year what to do. There's no coaching that's going on. The first coaching that starts is when the first, say, throwing and receiving starts. The other stuff that happens that should be happening is not being coached, and yet it lays the foundation for everything after that. If you're not able to teach and coach the dynamic movement and stretching routines, your explosive step and baseball step routines, how can you ask the player to do it when you get out to position fundamentals? So you've got to start your coaching them. I'm shocked, and I'm sure you see this all the time too, Coach. Even in throwing and receiving progression, they've shown the players 5 or 6 drills to do to get warmed up in their throwing and receiving progression. They're not coaching it. So at the end of the season, there's nobody, at least as a result of the coaching in practice, who's any better at throwing and receiving than they were at the beginning of the year, because the coaches aren't coaching it. They're yelling out things like, they're accurate. Let's try to hit a target. Let's try to move so that your body's in front of the ball. Well, those are good tips, but that's not coaching, throwing, and receiving. All right, there's a lot more to it than that. So we've got to have enough help organized. All of this prep work is done before the players even arrive. So when the players arrive, and I have a whole list of things that you should be doing as they arrive, but as they've arrived, from the very first moment the first player arrives to the last moment when the last player leaves, we are coaching, teaching, and mentoring them, and not off doing something else. We have to maximize our teaching time, our interaction time with them. So pre-practice wise, those are the 5 things. Do your homework, master teaching what you know before expanding what you know. Get yourself physically and mentally ready to teach them as people, athletes, players. Post a written practice plan with time segments, and arrive early enough to prepare the field, set up all the equipment and stations, discuss with your coaches who, what, when, where, why, and how, so that when players arrive, you're ready to interact with them at all times.
The master what you know before expanding what you know comment really piqued my interest. I think that just goes right along with the 80-20 principle. I did have a follow-up question. You mentioned that we first, when we're mastering what we know, we're trying to find out what's the best way, the optimal way to coach our particular players, team. What are some ways to gauge if we know what we're coaching is correct or not? What are some ways to gauge that or to assess that, evaluate that from a coaching perspective?
Okay, so when you say correct, you mean correct for that player, not correct fundamentally.
Well, for that player, maybe fundamentally, maybe for the team. How do we know what we're doing is correct as a coach, just in general? What are some things that would lead us to believe that what we're doing is correct rather than going, I don't know if this is working or not?
All right, so it's a 2-part question. When it comes to getting your information from credible sources to know if what you're teaching is correct, the first thing you should not do is base it on whether your team is winning or not. You may be winning as a result of a really good pitcher or two and a good catcher and mediocre competition. So just because you're winning doesn't mean you're developing good players. We talked about that in a previous podcast as well. Secondly, there are sources for every part of baseball that I like. say Lou Colon in infield work, overtime athletes for athleticism training, things like that. There are good sources, reputable sources out there to get good information from. I just wouldn't go on the internet and just get it from anybody. And I've given you some at the end of the article you can post for your listeners as well. Looking at coaches who are very experienced at higher levels, okay, is also a good idea. If you're a youth coach, go watch a very successful high school, college coach practice. Watch how they organize their practices, how they teach. Like I said before, invite your high school coaches in clinics, have them give you feedback on what you're doing. Really encourage the high school coaches to do it more than once. There's many, many high school coaches out there that have a clinic at the beginning of the year for the league's coaches, and they go through a series of drills and concepts in different phases of the game. I think that's important, but I think it should be more than that one-time event. If they really want their players to come in to the point where they don't have to reteach them, they're just refining them. So learn from coaches, and at a higher level in your sport, and also from other sports. When you watch other sports, and watch how coaches coach. Watch off the ball, not what's happening with the ball, and watch coaches more than players. You can learn so many of the things that I've learned over the years. I've learned from John Wooden in basketball, Anson Dorrance in soccer, Jose Mourinho. Different coaches can teach you different things. When it comes to the individual player, that's probably one of the most difficult things is to learn the learning style of this player. But if you're telling a player what to do and they're not able to do it, then you should look for a visual or kinesthetic means. Let's just say if the ball's not coming out of the player's hand correctly, they're making a lot of errors in the way they throw. Well, maybe you should be using striped balls or flat two-sided balls. Then on the stripe ball, a visual image of the stripe going over the top in a 12-6 rotation so that they can actually see what it looks like. Or the flat-sided clean fuego spin right ball where they can actually not only place their fingers, but see the result of it with that ball. Other cues to these players that allow them to use a different learning style that may connect with them a little better. And then finally, when you really commit yourself to this athleticism piece at the beginning of practice, you'll start to, be able to visually take the glove, ball, and bat out of a player's hands and stop looking at the result of the throw or hit. And you can look at the player and see the athlete. You can see, wow, I'm asking this player to field a ground ball with thighs parallel to the ground, flat wrist, flat back. And yet this player doesn't have the physical ability to do that. They don't have the strength in their legs. They don't have the stability in their knees or hips. I'm asking my catcher to block with low hips. Well, all I saw, or what most coaches see, is the player didn't block the ball well. And they're telling him, well, you need to move in front of it or have a quicker glove. What they're not seeing is the athlete doesn't have the range of motion, the mobility in their hips, and they're not coordinated enough in their movement to be able to do what you're asking them to do. You see, each one of these things presents a list of inquiries that you have to consider. So the one is, am I teaching sound fundamentals and mechanics? Okay, I got to get my information from credible sources. And then with the individual player, am I teaching with the right learning style? Do I really have approaches in my drills that are more than just auditory cues? And can this player really athletically do what I'm asking them to do?
So I got a 4-part checklist that came about as you were saying this. At the end there, you're talking about, are they getting the results? Are the players getting the results or not? Is that player getting better or not? And so I think that's one way to know if we're doing it correct, right? Or at least if it's working. Are they getting better or are they not getting better? And then if, like you said, if they're not, what are some other things that you can do? And I like how you gave some examples of things that we can do as coaches differently if it's not working.
I would say, can I see improvement in their process so that I know eventually the result is going to be better? As coaches, we have to be able to evaluate our players from the ground up. Posture, balance, footwork, angles in both their body and their movement, rhythm and timing. Posture, balance, footwork, angles, rhythm and timing. So when I look at this player, all right, he may not be blocking the ball, receiving the ball, catching the ball yet, but boy, his footwork is a lot better. He's actually getting his thighs parallel to the ground. Maybe what I need to do now is train him a little bit more on preparation and anticipation and reaction because his action is actually really good. His preparation is not great. His anticipation is not great. His reaction is not great. But his action in the way he goes about actually fielding the ball is better. So when I get these other things ready, the whole thing's going to come together. So I think, again, I'm such a process-oriented guy, coach. I just look at process. And I try to teach coaches, stay away from the results. Quit looking at the result of the throw, result of the hit, and look at the player from the ground up and see the process, because there's so many false results. He got the out. Okay, well, yeah, great. But that ball was hit really easy right at him. He's not going to get the out when he's going to have to go left or right hard, because the way he went about preparation, anticipation, reaction was not good. So I always teach coaches, learn a process, analyze from the process, and get away from the result. The process will lead to the result.
I will say this, and this is where I deviate from the norm in coaching, the old school kind of conventional wisdom. And this is where I think we've gone astray on this in a way. And this is how I was coached up forever, and guys I coached with forever. It was always the process. Here's the biggest problem I see with just focusing solely on the process. We don't know, especially for youth coaches or inexperienced coaches, or even coaches like us who have been around for years that are maybe coaching things, or we're coaching a whole wide variety of things out on the baseball field, catching, pitching, hitting, outfield, infield, base running, this, that, and there's 1,000 things to coach on a field. So that we've mastered all of them is probably not true. So even experienced coaches like us don't have the process figured out, because that means if we have the process figured out, it means we know exactly how to coach it, and we know exactly the steps to get the player there. So thus, we think we have all the processes figured out. I think, especially with youth coaches, they don't know the process. I mean, they might know a throwing progression process, but they might not know the base running process. But when it comes to baseball or sports, almost everybody knows what a good result looks like. In other words, they know if the hitter hits a line drive consistently, but they don't know the process of a swing and balance and timing and rhythm and posture and torso angles and all that yet. But they do know that they're hitting the ball consistently, hitting line drives consistently. So I think the big error that we have in the baseball community and sports community is we undervalue the results to drive the process. We use the process because we're assuming our process is correct. And so what I look at it is, we're trying to assess our process. I think it's pivotal and vital to use the results outside of those caveats like you're talking about. But if a kid's hitting line drives consistently, or missing this pitch consistently, or hitting the target when he's pitching consistently or not, every listener that listens to this knows what that looks like. They can assess that. They can put a metric on that. There's stats all over the place for that. Are they having success at the plate over a long period of time? I agree with you. One at-bat is not a good sample size. One game is not a sample size. But over the course of 20, 30 at-bats, we should be able to tell, based off of the basic statistics on base percentage, slugging, batting, just basic stuff that Game Changer gives us, whether they're successful or not, their strikeout and walk rates. So I do think it's pivotal that we use results to drive our process, or at least to assess our process. Using the results like I just spoke about to assess our process. Are we coaching it right? I mean, if we're coaching it one way and our kids go out there and strike out for the whole season, well, then what we're coaching is not working, or at least the way we're explaining it's not working, or how we're training it's not working. Well, one part of that, one component of that's not working, or all of it's not working.
Well, we're going to agree to disagree, Coach Bo, and I think that's fine. I think that's why I admire your podcast. You're not afraid to bring on people that have a differing point of view. Your listeners love you and respect you, and they should. You're a very experienced, very successful coach, and I think they should listen to what you have to say. I don't see this topic the same way you do, and I'm just going to tell you why, from my experience.
Definitely.
And then, we'll just leave it at that. We'll move on. There's no problem with that. I'm going to tell a story just in case people aren't going to go back to our previous podcast that I've told before to kind of illustrate one of my points. I was a number of years ago, 15 years ago, sitting with 6 college coaches watching 2 high-level club ball teams play, all right? This is early in the summer. There was myself and 6 coaches from junior college, community college, all the way through Division I. They were watching 2 teams play, and these are club ball teams with elite high school players playing on it, okay? And after the game was over, the coaches started to get up, and I said, coaches, I need to ask you a question because I want to be able to tell this story for years and years ahead. And I already know the answer to this question, but I want to hear your response, and I hear why you feel the way you do. I said, out of the 22 players that played, there were 9 starters on each game plus 4 subs, each team plus 4 subs. Out of the 22 players, who, and again, this is at any college level, Who are you even remotely interested in? And I said, don't tell me. The shortstop on this team, who was the guy I was there watching, I had coached him since he was 9 years old. He already had a college scholarship, by the way. And the left fielder on the other team. And they all said, yeah. All 6 coaches agreed that out of 22 players on 2 elite teams, there were only 2 that they were interested in. And I said, why is that? And they said, because these guys have played against weak competition their entire lives. They think they're good because they have 600 batting averages or strike everybody out, and they're not any good. And I said, well, can they be better? And they said, I mean, by the end of the summer, are you going to come and watch them again? And I said, no. And I said, why not? Because they're not going to work on a process that's going to make them better. They're just going to keep playing teams that they can beat and thinking they're good because they hit bombs and strike people out, and they're not any good. There's only 2 guys out here that are any good, and they've been told they were good from day one, and they're not. The first thing is base your opinion on whether you're good or not good, on whether your average is high, whether your ERA is low. 3 things in sport, in baseball and grades that mean anything. How high were the standards? How tough was the competition? And how hard did you have to work for it? Okay. So you're basing these things off of mediocre competition. The second thing is, if the results are good, if you're not hitting for a high average and have a low ERA, how are you going to know how to make it better if you don't understand the process? I'm not talking about, let's say attack angle and hitting, okay, whether it should be slightly up, slightly down, whatever, okay? I'm not talking about that. I agree with you there. There's a lot of misinformation. What today's trend is could be tomorrow's debunked theory, okay? That's not what process is. Process is from dry mechanic through mechanics with implements, stationary through motion. What is the teaching process? And how do I look at a player and see the reason he's not hitting well, and the solution to it is not another hitting drill. It's the fact that he can't move his hips. He is locked into his hips. He needs more hip mobility, okay? If I can't recognize that, I can't help this kid, all right? So that's what I mean about process. And you are absolutely right that most of these hard-working coaches are out there doing everything they can to the best of their ability, but they don't know what they don't know. That's why it's incumbent upon the leagues to teach them how to teach, all right? So that they understand, oh my word, that's how I'm actually going to get this kid to learn. Teach them what are visual cues, what are kinesthetic cues. Teach them the 6-step teaching process, okay? And if they don't have time for it, then like I say, let's reorganize how we have our teams and leagues so that people do understand pitching and know how to teach it through a process. The kids go to them. We're asking these dads and moms to be jack of all trades, to teach every position, whether they know it or not, to kids of different personalities, different learning styles. They don't have the time or maybe the background and experience to do it. Let's let some of the other people in our league who do have that teach these kids. We need to open up our minds about how we're going about development. That's what I'm saying.
100%. 100%. Okay. Love it. Love it. I took on this new role. The local league has brought me on their board as the coaching director. And so they saw exactly what you're seeing and what I think a lot of us like you and myself have been in this a long time. And we see that we got to coach up the coaches. I think the leagues have to be responsible, not just for giving them jerseys and a schedule, but coaching them up, right? And not just, hey, where's your practice field? But here are your practice plans. I just spent 4 hours this weekend alone putting together a winter coaching guide, not a spring, not a summer, not a fall, a winter coaching guide, just for 1 3-month stretch for all the coaches so they can use it. I put it online, I put it on a PDF, so they have access and there's resources linked to it. And so coach up the coaches. I love what you're saying there. And I'll say this one last thing about the results. I'm glad you brought this up to make sure that we're using results that take away bad competition or good competition and just really good fundamental baseball. What does it look like? How can you test it? I love a stopwatch. I like accuracy. I like consistency. Like how many line drives can they hit? How many pitches can they throw in this target, in this spot? And I think it should be the player competing against themselves to improve themselves, because then you take out the variables. So what do you think about that?
I think we're discussing some very important topics here. I think you have to build games and competitions in however you want, whether it's competing against yourself or others initially, so that A, they have fun. That's always important. And B, so that they feel good about themselves. I think you need to make it age appropriate, skill level appropriate. So I think that's where the competing against yourself, be the best you can be, has some value, because we want the kids to feel good. It's like, hey, I had success today. I hit the target. I fielded X number of balls cleanly. I hit so many balls hard, whether it's line drive or whatever. We're not into the result of whether it was an out or not. I hit it hard. I think all those things definitely have value. My problem is, and I coach a lot of sports in my life, but baseball is tough. I mean, here's my experience, Coach Bo, at the youth level. And this is I'm just telling it like it is, okay? If our team wins, the parents go home happy and the kids generally go home happy. And yet, if you really fully evaluated objectively what went on, there were a lot of walks. There were hit batters. There were strikeouts. There were pass balls and wild pitches. There were stolen bases without anybody being thrown out. The general rule is walk, stolen base, pass ball or wild pitch, and run. And so, we won 10-2, but how many balls were really hit hard? How many balls were actually hit hard and fielded cleanly and thrown accurately in the game? There really isn't a lot of objective evaluation as to the quality of play. It's whether we won or not. We have to understand the process, all right? We have to teach body angles, glove angles, transfer, and throwing mechanics, because that's the only way that those throws are going to be accurate. The bottom line is, sure, I'd like this guy to field 10 balls and throw 10 of them accurately and feel good if he did 8 or 9 accurately. Baseball is tough. That's not going to happen very often at a youth level. They're going to maybe field easy ground balls 6, 7, 8 times, but they're not going to throw 8 or 10 accurately. So when they don't, we can't just say, well, you'll do better next time. We have to know how to coach them up. What is the process that's going to help them get her? And it's not by telling them, focus harder, try harder in your warm-ups to throw to a target. No, there are actually mechanical reasons, process reasons, athletic reasons why it's not going to go well. And it could start with something as little as a grip. Their grip could be wrong in the way they hold the ball. And it always is. It always is. And the same thing with hitting. It could be nothing more than how they grip a bat. And it could lead to better results. So I think we have to have an eye for process if the results, across the board are going to get better. That's what I would say.
What about just throw strikes?
Right? We hear that all the time. Hey, try and get that up. We've given up 3 doubles in a row. Hey, we should probably throw the ball lower. The pitcher knows that. How about telling me something process-oriented that'll allow me to throw the ball better, Next thing, dynamic movement and stretching routine. What 5 tips would I have in this area of practice? So, as I said, we should be developing athletes, not just players. The best athletes have the most potential to be the best players, okay? We should take 15, 20 minutes of every practice, and we should have a dynamic movement. Well, we should have an athleticism piece. It's even too limited to say dynamic movement and stretching, okay? So tip number 1, have one, okay? Running to a tree or a pole and back will not prepare your team physically, mentally, neurologically to be trained as athletes or developed as players. That's not going to do it, all right? We need an actual athleticism piece, which is going to include dynamic movement and stretching, as well as explosive steps, baseball steps, strength conditioning, ab core, plyometrics. All of these things are going to be included in it. You can find a certified, credentialed, experienced person at a local gym that'll be more than happy to give you an 8U program, a 10U program, a 12U program, and a 14U program to train these kids on how to move optimally. So have a routine. Secondly, be actually present and able to teach it. Don't give the team 8 things to do in a dynamic movement routine and go off and start preparing your field for practice. That's not going to help them to be better athletes, okay? You need to be able to teach it, assess it, teach it, progress it, and compete it. So if you can't do it, you need to find somebody who can, because you're not doing your kids any good by just having them do some skips and jumps and shuffles and things like that. It's not teaching. Okay. The word coach is a verb. You need to be able to teach it. Okay. You need to take this part of practice as seriously as you do throwing, fielding, and hitting, because in fact, it's the foundation for all of those things. If they cannot move well as athletes, they will not field, throw, and hit well. All of the solutions to them not hitting, not throwing, and not fielding well are in their athleticism. The better you train them as athletes, the more potential you give them as players. So this is a huge missing piece in not just baseball training, but all sports training. They have a warm-up. The warm-up is not designed to make them better athletes, and it's not being taught with the same level of knowledge and intense preparation and detail orientation as the rest of the sport is. If they would take the same serious approach to teaching athleticism as they do hitting, fielding, and throwing, they would have much better teams, both now and in the future. Third, all coaches and the league itself must have a system to assess, teach/program, progress, monitor all of these players year to year and team to team. We have to be sure that they're actually getting better year to year. So the league, as you said, Coach, needs to have a system where at 8U, they're going to be able to do these things. At 10U, they're going to be able to do these things. And we're going to monitor it. We're going to program it. We're going to keep them moving forward. We're going to progress it. So that by the time they're 14U, they can go and play any sport, and they're a lot better athlete because we've actually trained it, not just had them participate in our sport, okay? We need to train them how to walk, march, skip, run, bound, sprint, shuffle, backpedal, jump, and hop in all planes of motion optimally in a coordinated and synchronized manner. I'm going to repeat that. Walk, march, skip, run, bound, sprint, shuffle, backpedal, jump, and hop in all planes of motion optimally in a coordinated and synchronized manner. That's what it means to be an athlete, not just run fast and jump high, okay? You may have a kid that can jump high and run fast. That's great. Those are important qualities. But there's a lot more to fielding a baseball than that. There's a lot more to hitting a baseball than that. And we have to understand that. And the training's got to include mobility, flexibility, stability, balance, breathing, visual acuity, mental mindfulness, focus, speed, agility, quickness, strength, and power, okay? All of those things go into being a high-quality elite athlete. Again, if we're just out there trying to have fun with our friends, none of this matters. Just go out and have fun. Bring the orange slices and the donuts afterward. Do what you got to do. But if we're serious about developing athletes, we need to have a system where all of these things are being trained and trained in the right way. Number 4, and I mentioned this before, almost all youth coaches focus on action. How do we get them to throw, field, and hit a baseball better? What they don't train enough is preparation, anticipation, and reaction. What's preparation? Who, what, when, where, why, and how does this occur in the game? What you and I, Coach, call tells and tendencies of the pitcher, of the hitter, whatever, the tells and tendencies. That's preparation. Anticipation, now that we know the who, what, when, where, why, and how, the tells and tendencies, how do we recognize them in the game? Okay. How do we recognize when the pitcher's going to do this, when the hitter's going to do this, when the team that we're facing, our opponent, is going to do that? All right. Preparation, anticipation. And oh, by the way, part of anticipation is wanting and expecting the ball. Okay. We have to train that level of self-confidence. I want the ball. I expect the ball. I want to be the guy. I want to be the dude. And then reaction. We know that the greatest fundamentals and mechanics in the world are no good if you can't get to the ball on time, whether you're throwing it, fielding it, or hitting it, and if you can't do so in a coordinated manner. So you've got to have good reaction skills, and that's not trained enough. We train action, but not reaction, okay? And you've got to be able to get there before you can use your mechanics, your fundamentals of mechanics. And then 5, even in the athleticism piece of practice, you need to make it fun. Every phase, as you said, Coach, of practice needs to have games and needs to have competitions. You need to compete, whether it's against yourself, against another player, against other players, against the clock, whatever. You need to compete so that when you get to that championship game, I'm not under pressure. We compete at every phase of practice, not just at the end of the practice, scrimmage, or game sim, We compete in athleticism. We compete in the throwing and receiving progression. We compete in positions and fundamentals. We compete in pitchers and catchers bullpens. We compete, and we're doing it with games that make it fun. So have an athleticism piece, be physically present and able to teach it. Have all coaches in the league actually have a system that is assessed, taught, programmed, and progressed. Train preparation, anticipation, reaction, as well as action, and make it fun by competing. Those are the 5 tips I have for your athleticism piece of practice.
This dynamic warm-up, the movement, the priority of it, the importance of it, building a better athlete, not just going through the motions. 100%. Everything you say, I've never been more aligned with somebody I've spoken to over the years of all the coaches I've talked to. Love what you got there, Coach. Thank you. Throwing and receiving progression. Tell us what at practice, and this is huge. So this follows, okay, so we're starting practice with the dynamic movement and stretching routine. Now we're moving to the throwing and receiving progression. Tell us about this.
Well, again, I don't want coaches to think this is my practice outline because it's not. Let me just establish this coach to the other coaches. We don't lose credibility with them. Homework, review, and a game before practice. So even before practice starts, I've given them homework. We review the homework. If they've done it, they get to go do the game that I've set up. If they not, then we go do the homework or we work on a skill to make them a better player. So that's one. Second part of practice is announcements and going over the practice plan and what is expected. We discuss the life lesson quote, or an acronym, something to start the day with a lesson about adversity, work ethic, whatever. We have a baseball IQ type of discussion, something in the game to, again, prepare them for what we're going to do and how it relates to the game. Then we have our cheer. And then we have our athleticism piece. I want to get away from the term. I shouldn't have put dynamic movement and stretching. Then we have our athleticism piece of practice. All right. As a part of that, we have physical conditioning, which might be strength training, ab core, and in baseball needs to have things for shoulder integrity. All right. Then we have base running, and as a part of base running, I work in more baseball IQ stuff. It just seems to go in well with base running. Base running for very young ages is a separate part of practice. For older, say middle school on up, it's a part of everything we do. Okay, you don't ever have hitting and your hitting fundamentals without having base running as a part of your hitting, for example. So base running might be a separate part, and it might be just part of many different parts of practice. Then we have our throwing and receiving progression. Then we have position fundamentals. Then we have a hitting progression. Then we have team defense. Then we have a game simulation or scrimmage. Then we have another physical conditioning piece, usually sprints, things like that. And then we dress down the field and tear down stations. And then we have a concept review, homework, a life lesson quote or acronym discussion that has to do with being a better person. So think about overcoming adversity, being a better son, daughter, student, things like that. And then a review of what they were expected to have learned from practice and a cheer at the end. And I'll just say this, at every phase of practice, one of the biggest mistakes coaches make is they don't have their players talk enough. They don't get feedback from the players after a particular drill. What did you think you did well? What did you think needed to be improved? What do you think we did well today at practice? Always starting with the positive. What do you think we could do better? We. Get them to talk. They're not verbal people. They're device people. They're used to looking at a device, scrolling left or right, texting. They're not able to express themselves as well as they need to in their life. And if we're going to learn about our players, we need to be sure to get feedback from them at all times. So that's my basic outline. The throwing and receiving progression we're going to go next is actually, what is that? Step 6 or phase 6. The first thing I want to emphasize is this is a throwing and receiving progression. I know I'm in the minority. I'll just state up front. I hate the word catch play. I just hate it. I hate the phrase, oh, who started it? We should never start, because we're not out there just playing catch. We are throwing and receiving with a purpose. This is deliberate practice. We are trying to get better every throw at throwing the ball, receiving the ball, and transferring ball, every single throw. I call it throwing and receiving progression. Other people can call it catch play. As long as we're on the same page, this is one of the most important parts of practice, and it needs to be approached in that way. Make sure they have an arm care routine before they throw. They need to have done the dynamic movement, and it needs to incorporate upper and lower body. It needs to be all about coordination and all of these things, but they also have to have some shoulder integrity stuff. So we have to make sure that they have the right mobility, range of motion in the shoulder, stability in the shoulder. We can't just run them around and ask them to start throwing the baseball. There has to be, at the very young ages, at least have a routine where they're taking their glove and bending over at the waist till their chest is parallel to the ground, and they're doing arm circles, 5 one direction, 5 the other direction, figure eights for both arms. Then they're stand up. They're doing big arm circles, forward for 5, backward for 5, and then doing some stretches, whether it's across the chest, over the head. Don't forget your forearms and wrists and elbows. Those are very important. And then you have to have something to fire up the rotator cuffs. So in youth baseball, we can do forearm presses with palms facing one another, palms facing you, palms facing away. You press your forearms together, and in a count of 5, you go slightly upward for each of those 3 things. That will fire up your shoulders. There's also a finger pressing routine that I won't go over now that you can do with your forearms together, and the way you press your fingertips together in a certain pattern that will also fire up your rotator cuffs. Very important to do that. Have an arm care routine for every player. Make sure we do it. Number 2, we just said, and I'll just emphasize again, have them do more than catch play. Every day, coaches must carefully teach the mechanics of receiving, transferring, and throwing so that at the end of the year, we're actually a lot better at receiving and transferring and throwing the baseball. There are very, very few youth teams where the players are actually a lot better at throwing and receiving and transferring the baseball at the end of the year than they were at the beginning. If they are, it's usually as a result of private coaching outside of the team and not on the team. And it's because the coaches either don't know how to teach it or they're not actually teaching individually. It drives me crazy to see 5 coaches standing around either just watching or just yelling out verbal cues to these players, and they're not stepping in to actually check grips, watching their break and transfer mechanics, making sure the sequencing is correct. They're not teaching these things to begin because they don't understand the process. Number 3, every throw and every reception must be done for a specific purpose and with an intent to be accurate and mechanically correct. Every single throw has to matter. And we have to use training gloves, whether it's training the flat gloves, the pancake gloves, the Valley Eagle gloves. We have to use those as implements. We have to use striped balls, flat-sided balls to aid this process. So there's other ways to, use other learning modalities to get it involved. But every throw has to be done for that purpose, to be mechanically correct and accurate. It has to matter. As you and I know, Coach, pitching doesn't start on the mound. Pitching starts on flat ground throwing. It has to matter whether you hit the player's chest or not, okay? Every type of throw, this is a huge, huge piece. All the way up through high school, I don't see this being done in the throwing and receiving progression, all right? Number 4, every type of throw, underhand, backhand, dart, flip, relay, long hop, clock throws, right foot, do or die, muff and dive, every one of those throws needs to be practiced every practice. We must get better at them. They're not going to go well in the game at game speed if we don't practice them every day. And it has to start in the throwing and receiving progression. You can't ask a shortstop to make great feeds during your position fundamentals if you haven't taught him the mechanics of it when we are doing our throwing and receiving progression. You can't ask your guys to do tags and force play mechanics when you're out doing position fundamentals if you haven't done it in throwing and receiving. So you have to teach every type of throw, and every situation must be included in that. Relays, rundowns, tag plays, force plays, everything that you're going to ask the players to do in position fundamentals and later on in a game stem or game or scrimmage has to be taught in throwing and receiving progression. How do we do that? We actually bring home plates and bases out to throwing and receiving progression so we can work on force plays and tag plays and rundowns and relays. All of that has to be programmed in, all right? 5, the last one is, this is the most individual part of practice. Not every player's arm is going to be it's going to feel the same, all right? It may be tired. The player may be sick, not feeling great. They may have pitched the night before, whatever. We got to be careful that we monitor the number of throws that a player is making based on how they feel. And quite honestly, we have to monitor if they're playing on other teams, whether they're playing a high volume position, that they're throwing a lot and throwing hard. So we have to count the total number of throws that this player is doing. The arm doesn't know whether you're pitching or not. The arm only knows how hard you're throwing, how often you're throwing, how well you're throwing, okay? So we need to take care of these arms by making sure that they are warmed up properly, onboarded properly with the right stability, and that we are monitoring how many throws that they're actually doing before they, say, go and pitch or whatever. Now, the positions they play may also dictate a certain number of throws and a certain number of distance throws or whatever, and that has to be taken into account too. But we have to keep in mind that there is a value in versatility, okay? We want our players to go to high school and say, you know what, coach, I can play infield, I can play outfield, I can catch, I can do whatever. As you and I know, there are certain college coaches that only recruit shortstops. Why? Because they can convert a shortstop to a third baseman or a center fielder or a catcher or whatever. So you want to be versatile. But there are times, as a practical matter, you're going to have your players do different types of throws based on their positions so they can get better at those positions as well. So, number one, have an arc care routine. Number two, don't ever just play catch play. Make it matter. They are working every day on being better at receiving, transferring, and throwing. Make sure that they take it as seriously as every other thing. In other words, I want to make it mechanically correct and accurate. Make sure that every type of throw and every situation is programmed into your throwing receiving progression so they practice it every day. And number five, take into account individual variances on, the types of throws and how much they throw to protect their arms and the positions they play. So those are my 5 tips for throwing and receiving progression.
Thanks, Coach. All right, that wraps up part 1 of the interview with Coach SARANCIK. Part 2 of 2 will come to you next week, next Tuesday, when we roll out our weekly Tuesday episode. Until then, grab that drill design guide over at 8020baseball.com. Leave a quick review for the podcast, and let's take care of our health so we can take care of our families, be there for our close friends when they need us, and we can be the best coach possible. Let's take this information out to the field, out to the training grounds, and put it into play. Y'all take care, and until next week, adios.
This has been the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass. Take it to the field.